Ralph Nader is the Green Party presidential candidate. He is also a populist, a leading critic of corporate America, and a consumer advocate. Before this year's election campaign, he ran for the White House in 1996. He was excluded, much to his dismay, from the first presidential debate last Tuesday. We want to talk about that and other issues that form the basis of his campaign.
Thank you, Charlie.
Tell me about the debates. Is there going to be any possibility that you are going to be able to get on any forum anywhere with the nominees of the Democratic Party and Republican Party?
Not unless public opinion breaks their will here. They hold the cards. It's a private company called the Debates Commission, created and controlled by the two parties, and they're excluding competitors. But there's a rush of newspaper editorials now saying, why not open up the debates to Buchanan?
Well, at least one would think would be good.
One would think.
Yeah.
You know, people as diverse as John McLaughlin, Brian Lamb, the governor of New Mexico, the Republican Gary Johnson,
right.
Mario Cuomo. It doesn't matter. I mean, the polls are showing 64%. The American people want a four-way debate. You know, the audience shrank the other night to a very low 35 or so million people when 90 million people watched the Ross Perot debate with Clinton and Bush.
What did you think of the debate, though, notwithstanding the fact that the audience eroded during the hour and a half?
Well, I thought it was a little bit sterile. I don't know if I'd go as far as Dan Rather, who called it narcolepsy-inducing and pedantic. But
Dan's to the left of you on this issue.
They don't deal with the central issue, which is the distribution of power in the country. There's too much concentrated power and wealth in too few hands.
Now, you're sounding like Al Gore.
Well, no, he hasn't really said that, although I think he's borrowed some populist rhetoric.
Well,
from me,
I think
Charlie.
so, too. I want to get to that, because here is what, tell me whether you think this is America. As someone said to me the other day, listen, Rose, you've got to understand, America is essentially a right-center country. You think that's true?
No, not at all. I mean, it's a top-down. That's what it is. Isn't right and left. The real issues are who has the power and who doesn't. And I'm contending and can document that voters, workers, consumers, and taxpayers don't have much power at all. It's in the hands of these big companies who are connected with the two parties, fund the same two parties with the same corporate interests, things that John McCain criticized, things that Bill Bradley criticized, even things that Ross Perot criticized. They got millions of votes. But there's no one carrying that torch to November except the Nader-LeDuc Green Party ticket.
How would you do it? Reduce the power of the few and spread it out to the many?
Well, public funding of public campaigns, same-day voter registration will give voters more voice. They won't have their votes nullified by money in politics. That's one. Second, repeal Taft-Hartley Act and other restrictive labor laws that keep tens of millions of workers from forming trade unions, especially those in low-paid jobs, of which there are a huge number. 1 out of every 3 workers in this country doesn't earn a living wage, places like Walmart and McDonald's and Burger King and Kmart. Third, give people universal health insurance. That will sure help consumers, and give consumers some good old-fashioned law enforcement against the corporate crooks and the defrauders, especially, which eat away at low-income people in the ghettos, predatory lending. And then finally, taxpayers. Hundreds of billions of dollars going into corporate welfare, subsidies, giveaways, handouts, the whole works.
Give me the worst as you see it.
In terms of these handouts?
Right.
Okay. 1872 Mining Act, never discussed by Bush and Gore. It allows a foreign or domestic corporation to go on our lands, on the federal lands, discover gold, molybdenum, copper, silver, you name it, hard rock metals. They document it with their geologists. They then fly to Washington, the Department of Interior, and Washington, because of this law, has to sell the acreage above the mine for $5 an acre. So a Canadian company, a few years ago, goes on federal land in Nevada, discovers $9 billion worth of gold, and gets it for $30,000. No royalties back to the government. We're the only country in the world who gives away our natural resources. The other outrage is the drug companies.
I would think American companies would be outraged by that.
Well, you know, American companies, foreign companies, what's the difference anymore, right? They're all mixed. The other one is the drug companies. They get all this free medicine that's developed by the taxpayer to National Institutes of Health, like the anti-cancer drug Taxol or AZT and AIDS. And under our federal government, We give them away the drugs. We give the drugs away to Bristol Myers Squibb and other companies. No royalties back to the government. No control of drug prices to millions of people. A few months ago, a woman with ovarian cancer said she lost her $19,000 a year job, goes to a doctor. He says, very serious. The only drug I can prescribe is Taxol. She says, how much? He said, 6 treatments, $14,000. Bristol Myers Squibb didn't spend a cent discovering and human clinically testing that drug. That was done by the taxpayer at the U.S. government, and that's what the story is in drug after drug.
Okay. The big debate among the two major party candidates has to do with the surplus and tax cuts.
Yeah.
Bush has proposed one tax cut proposal. Al Gore spent most of the debates attacking his tax cut proposal. Where do you come down in terms of the kind of tax cut proposal, or how you would handle the surplus if it's not a tax cut? What would you do to redistribute wealth as you see it?
No, first of all, enforce progressive taxation laws against corporations. What the New York Times has documented are getting all these shelters and loopholes, and they're increasing and draining away revenues from the government. That could be used for neighborhood and community needs. And look at America needs repair. You know, public transit, schools, clinics, drinking water systems, crumbling, lack of repair. The second is, I don't know if this surplus is going to materialize, Charlie. I mean, this is a projection. I think that both candidates are creating an unnecessary scare on Social Security. Social Security is not in trouble. Not in trouble at all. The Social Security trustees say that all the way to 2037, every dollar will be paid on 1.7% annual growth predictions. We're growing over 4%.
Then if the Social Security system is not vulnerable, is not in trouble, is George Bush right when he argues that we ought to privatize part of it so that individuals, especially young people, will be able to direct the investment of some of their Social Security?
No, because Social Security is security. It's been working beautifully since the 1930s. It gives retired people a sure check indexed to inflation. They don't have to look at the Dow Jones index every day. And above all, it's cut elderly poverty dramatically. Now, if Bush or Gore want to add another type of private retirement investment system, that's another issue.
Something on top of Social Security.
Yeah, I mean, don't mess around. It's a phony crisis, as Dean Baker pointed out in a recent book published by the University of Chicago Press. It's a phony crisis.
All right, let me move to this particular point. Your political performance. There is this sense that in one headline after another, it says the following: Nader draws increasingly big crowds as his poll numbers go down. The Washington Post, the New York Times, both in the last 2 or 3 weeks, those kinds of stories about you. What's happening so that your numbers are going down as your crowds, especially on university campuses, go up?
We had 12,000 at the Fleet Center in Boston, 12,000 in Minneapolis. Actually, the polls are coming back up. The Zogby poll just out today, 7% nationwide. Why did they go down, Charlie? Very interesting. Because the Democrat strategy was to bring my polls down by putting populist talk in Al Gore's speeches. He's going to fight big oil and big HMOs and big insurance companies. 8 years he didn't do that. But it worked for a while. But now our polls are starting to come back. 7% in California, between 8 and 11% in Connecticut, and 17% in Alaska.
How many electoral votes in Alaska?
It's a great state, though.
How many electoral votes does Alaska have?
I don't know, 3 or something, yeah.
What's the, what impact do you think you will have on this election? Can you make a difference in California? Will you make a difference in Michigan? Will you have some impact in New York? Where do you think that Ralph Nader may be decisive in what happens on November 7th?
Well, I'd like to be decisive, period, if I could get on the debate. So I think the close states, there are 40 states where Bush is way ahead or Gore is way ahead. So Texas, Bush, New York State, Connecticut, Gore. That's where people can vote their conscience and have the double header. I mean, if they want Bush to win, they don't have to vote for him in Texas because he's a landslide. They could vote for the Green Party, which could be a watchdog after November. See, this is what's going to come out after November, is a Green Party that's growing, that's robust, that has grassroots involvement, and that has millions of votes behind it. And it's going to tell the Democrat-Republican Party, you're either going to shape up for the American people, or you're going to shrink down in future elections. There's never been that kind of lever
Are you sitting
on the
here
two parties.
tonight saying you guarantee that the Green Party will do 7% of the vote on Election Day?
I'm very confident of that.
At least 7%?
Yeah, I'm very confident.
More than 7?
It could well go more than 7. You know, the tipping point is not quite clear, but, you know, Ventura was at 8% a month before the election. He gets on the debates. He gets state financing for a campaign. He gets same-day registration, and he zooms in 3 stages, 8%, 19%, 28%, and the last weekend, 38%, and he wins. Now,
in a three-person race.
Yeah, in a 3-person race. But the key here is we've already won in a number of ways. We've got tens of thousands of people coming into progressive political politics. You should see them pouring into our website. All kinds of people pouring into our website, votenader.com, by the way.
Do you think that is, in the end, a dissatisfaction with the major parties or an enthusiasm for Ralph Nader?
It's both. That's usually what politics is about. You get alienated from corrupt politics as usual. Then you look around and you see a new budding party growing.
And do you believe it is a dissatisfaction with the individual candidates or the core values that they articulate?
I think both. I think more serious is a disagreement with the corruption of money in politics, the increasing similarities of the two parties over structural power issues, and then they look at the candidates. You know, there's a reason why 51% of people stayed home in 1996. It's not all just apathy. It's people saying, I don't want to have anything to do with this system. I don't want to support
plague on all your houses.
Yeah, exactly.
But Bill Moyers told me today that he gave a commencement speech at the University of Texas. In the last 10 minutes or so, he talked about campaign finance reform, and the people were on their feet. You know, and some Bush people were there and said, "Wow, why is it not more prominent in this presidential campaign?" It is not. It is not like it was in the primary season when John McCain was trying to ride that horse all the way to the Republican nomination. Why?
Both parties are in a frenzied race to raise millions of dollars from corporate interests and soft money. They're tapping on the same corporate doors.
But they got the money. I'm telling you that in this campaign, if they thought it would make a difference, they wouldn't care about how much money they might get.
Oh, you mean in terms of the appeal?
They thought if they thought that this was an issue that would put them over the top.
Right.
I mean, George Bush would be bounding on that issue today.
But on the other hand, he'd have to knock his supporters, which he doesn't like to do.
If he thought he could win, he'd knock his supporters.
I don't think there's. If they're going to win, he'd have a third-party expenditure and the millions of dollars supporting the Green Party.
Well,
I think they're not selling it right, Charlie. Campaign finance reform is a dull phrase. What you got to say is, look, you want universal health insurance? You got to have reform of the dirty money in politics. You want a public investment in our inner cities and deal with child poverty? You got to do this. You want labor unions growth in this country to repeal Taft-Hartley? You got to get money out of politics. On and on. You have to connect it to people. You want HMOs to get off the back of your doctors and nurses? You got to have campaign finance.
But are you're saying, as John McCain used to say, and still does say this, that if you want to change politics in America first, whether you want to redistribute the wealth, whether you want to change the foreign policy, whatever you want to do, whether you want to get at loopholes, first you have to change campaign finance reform. If you don't do that, you can't change politics.
Correct. And you know, he almost upended Bush on that. And Bush had the whole Republican Party establishment behind him. It does have an appeal if you explain it the way he did and the way I try to do around the country.
What other issues are resonating? And because I wonder if this is an interesting country, as you well know, and you find it more interesting when you have the opportunity to run for president and you get out there and you talk to people. I've never talked to anybody who ran for president, didn't feel like it changed them in a sense of where the country was.
That's right. Yeah, you're right.
Tell me about that for you.
Farm country. Small farmers. The rural society is in serious depression and distress. Farmers going out of business, they can't make a living. The prices for wheat, corn, soy being crushed down 30–40% lower than they were 4 years ago by the big guys, you know, Cargill, Continental Grain, ADM, IBP. And so you're seeing more abandoned towns, more abandoned villages, you know, the doors creaking in the wind. And if we lose rural America, we're losing something extremely valuable. And historically, it gave us some of the greatest progressive political reform moves, cultural moves, our dynamic leadership. That's never talked about in this election. Just like the poor.
But are you saying we should protect rural America simply because it has some kind of spiritual value rather than because economically it no longer can be the engine that it has been?
Both. the farmers keep producing more and more food and getting lower and lower prices for it. We have to break up, under the antitrust laws, these giant agribusiness firms, for example, help farmers leapfrog direct to the marketplace, and help farmers preserve the land. The other area that Bush and Gore don't talk about are the poor. You notice in the wind-up of Gore, he said, I'm going to represent middle-class families. 1 out of every 3 workers in this country does not make a living wage. That's 47 million workers.
What's the definition of a living wage?
A living wage, $10 an hour. Just think how Just look, just listen for a minute. Look, the federal minimum wage today is $5.15.
Right. But the living wage is $10.
Yes. Congress, by the way, is raising its salary this week, but it hasn't raised the minimum wage. If you took the minimum wage in 1968, when the economy was half the size per capita that it is today, it would be, indexed for inflation, would be $7.30. So here it is, 10 million workers, 70% of them adults, are making $5.15, $2.15 less than what the minimum wage in real purchasing power was in 1968. With the economy double what it is, corporate profits skyrocketing, corporate stock market skyrocketing. There are whole huge segments of American society are being left behind. And the Democrats come in, they talk to African Americans, Hispanics, oh, we're for you. I'm really getting sick of that.
Tell me who in the United States Senate is closest to you in terms of the ideas and values you believe in. United States Senate, there are only 100 of them.
Right.
Who is it?
Senator Feingold.
Feingold. Russ Feingold.
Right. Senator Wellstone.
Paul Wellstone.
Right.
All right.
Sometimes Senator Boxer.
Yeah.
And
Barbara Boxer from California.
Right.
All right. Who are the 3 or 4 people you would want in a government if for some reason there is a political miracle and Ralph Nader gets up in November morning and finds out he's the guy?
Great Americans who aren't celebrities. Tony Mazzocchi, former vice president of the Oil, Chemical, and Atomic Workers as Secretary of Labor.
Right.
Professor Robert Felmuth, the University of San Diego Law School, for head of Health and Human Services.
Well, who's your Secretary of State?
Secretary of State? Let me see. Let me see. I'll have to get back to you on that.
All right. Ralph Nader is running for President of the United States, and there are a lot of people who think that at least there ought to be one time in this campaign season when Ralph Nader and Pat Buchanan and Governor Bush and Vice President Gore appear on the same forum to talk about their different views to America and what ought to be done to make America even greater. My thanks to Ralph Nader. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you, Charlie.
Back in a moment. Stay with us.